This 95-year-old farmer thought he could escape his past until the Mexican cartel discovered who he really was. What would you do if your darkest secrets came back to threaten everything you love? I heard the trucks before I saw them. Big black ones with tinted windows, coming up my dirt road, kicking up dust clouds that reached as high as the old oak tree. My bones ached as I pulled myself out of bed. At 95 years old, everything hurts, but some days are worse than others. Today was already looking like one of the bad ones. Not again, I muttered, reaching for my walking stick. My dog Rex barked from the porch, warning me about the visitors. I didn't need his warning. Those trucks have been showing up more and more lately. My farm isn't much to look at anymore. 200 acres of corn, a small house that needs painting, and a red barn that's seen better days. But it's mine. Every inch of it paid for with 50 years of sweat and hard work after I left Mexico and came north. This land is all I have left of my dear Maria. We built this place together, and I promised her I'd never leave. The truck stopped in front of my house, and 5 men got out. I recognized their leader right away. Eduardo Vega. Fancy suit, expensive watch, and that smile that never reached his eyes. The others were just muscle, young men with hard faces and guns barely hidden under their jackets. "Buenos dias, old man," Eduardo called out as I stepped onto my porch. Rex growled beside me. "Beautiful morning to reconsider my offer, don't you think?" I didn't answer, just stared at him. The Sinaloa cartel had been trying to buy my land for months. First with money, then with threats. Still not talking? That's okay. Maybe this will loosen your tongue. Eduardo snapped his fingers, and one of his men handed him a folder. He walked up to my porch and dropped it at my feet. "You should remember this, Jeff Torres." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Jefe Torres, a name nobody had called me in 40 years. With shaking hands, I picked up the folder and opened it. Inside was an old police badge. My police badge. Chief Miguel Torres, Sonora State Police, 1970 to 1984. Ow! The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. Eduardo's smile grew wider. My father kept very good records of the men who wronged him, especially the police chief who arrested him and sent him to rot in prison. He leaned in closer. "You thought you could just disappear, change your name, and play farmer for the rest of your life?" Memories I'd buried deep came flooding back. The raids, the arrests, the death threats, the reason I'd fled north with Maria and our young daughter. "I'm just a farmer now," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Have been for decades. A farmer who owns the perfect piece of land for moving our products across the border." Eduardo looked out over my corn fields that stretched all the way to the tree line. "Such a shame your barn caught fire." My barn. I turned to look, and sure enough, smoke was rising from the far side of my property. The barn where I kept my tractor, my tools, my memories. Eduardo's men laughed as I watched my barn burn. "Next time it might be your house, Jeff Torres. Or maybe we'll pay a visit to that pretty granddaughter of yours in the city. Lucia, right?" The newspaper reporter. Ice filled my veins. They knew about Lucia. "You have 3 days to sign over your land," Eduardo said, walking back to his truck. "Or we'll finish what should have been done to you 40 years ago." As they drove away, I sank into my old rocking chair, the folder clutched in my hands. I'd spent 4 decades building a new life, becoming Miguel Hernandez the farmer, hiding the truth from everyone, even my own family. Now it was all crashing down around me. And Lucia was coming to visit tomorrow. My sweet granddaughter, who thought her abuelo was just a simple farmer with simple stories. How could I tell her that everything she knew about me was a lie? How could I protect her from enemies I'd made before she was even born? I looked down at the badge in my trembling hands. Chief Torres, the man I used to be, the man who knew how to fight back. Maybe it was time for Chief Torres to return. But as night fell and I stood among the smoldering ruins of my barn, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photo of Lucia leaving her apartment building, taken just days ago, with a red question mark drawn across her face. They weren't just threatening me. They were watching her too. How do you fight a war when you're 95 years old and the enemy knows exactly where to hit you? Tomorrow, when Lucia arrives, what will I tell her? And will telling her put her in even more danger? The smell of coffee woke me from a restless sleep. For a moment, I thought Maria was still alive, making breakfast in the kitchen like she used to. Then reality came crashing back. It wasn't Maria. It was Lucia, my granddaughter, who had arrived early while I was still asleep. Abuelo, she called when she heard me shuffling down the hallway. I made your favorite, strong coffee and huevos rancheros. Lucia looked so much like her grandmother. Same dark eyes, same gentle smile. At 32, she was already making a name for herself as an investigative reporter for a big newspaper in Dallas. Smart, fearless, and too curious for her own good. Just like I used to be. What happened to the barn? She asked as we sat at the kitchen table. I saw it when I drove in. Was there fire? I stared into my coffee cup. This wasn't how I wanted to start our visit, but after finding that marked photo, I couldn't risk keeping her in the dark. Lucia, I said slowly, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. But before I could continue, Rex started barking furiously outside. Through the window, I saw dust clouds rising from the road. The black trucks were coming back, a day earlier than promised. Who's that? Lucia asked, moving toward the window. Get away from there. I snapped, pulling her back. The fear in my voice surprised us both. Listen to me carefully. Those men are dangerous. They're Cartel. Her eyes widened. Cartel? Why would they? Because they want my land. And because... I took a deep breath. Because I used to be the chief of police in Sonora. I put away a lot of bad men, including Eduardo Vega's father. Lucia stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. In many ways, she was... Your real name isn't Miguel Hernandez? She whispered. No, it's Miguel Torres. I changed it when we came north in 1984. Your grandmother and I, we started over. We had to. The trucks were getting closer. I moved quickly to my bedroom and pulled an old wooden box from under my bed. Inside was a revolver I hadn't touched in years. Abuelo, you can't be serious, Lucia said, watching me check the chambers. We should call the police. And tell them what? That men who don't officially exist are threatening a man who doesn't officially exist. I shook my head. The local police can't help us. Some might even be on Vega's payroll. The trucks stopped outside. I looked at Lucia, my heart breaking. I'm sorry for bringing this danger to your door. I thought the past was buried. I was wrong. To my surprise, Lucia's fear was replaced by determination. She pulled out her phone. We're going to fight back, Abuelo. But not with that gun. With this. She opened her camera app. I'm a reporter, remember? We need evidence. She was right. A gun in my shaky hands wouldn't do much against Vega's men. But proof of their threats? That could be powerful in the right hands. Eduardo knocked on the door. Torres, I know you're home. I see the car in the driveway. A visitor? Your granddaughter, perhaps. I motioned for Lucia to start recording. Then I opened the door. Eduardo's smile faded when he saw Lucia standing behind me with her phone pointed at him. Put that away, he growled. It's streaming live to my editor, Lucia lied smoothly. Everything you say and do is being watched. It wasn't true, but the doubt that flashed across Eduardo's face was worth the bluff. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Both of you. The mistake was thinking I would give up without a fight, I replied, feeling stronger than I had in years. I may be old, but I remember how men like you operate. You hide in shadows. You don't like witnesses. Eduardo's eyes narrowed. Fine, we'll do this differently. He handed me an envelope. Inside is a deed transfer. Sign it before midnight tomorrow. He glanced at Lucia, the threat clear in his eyes. After they left, Lucia turned to me, her face pale. This is real, isn't it? They really will hurt us. I opened the envelope. Inside was the deed transfer, but also something else. A faded photograph of a much younger me in police uniform standing over the body of a man. A man I didn't kill, but whose death was blamed on me. The reason I had to flee. They have more than just threats, I whispered. They have a frame-up from 40 years ago that could still send me to prison. Lucia sat down heavily. We need help. There might be someone, I said slowly, remembering faces from long ago. My old deputy, Rodriguez. Last I heard, he retired to a town about 50 miles from here. If he's still alive. Let's find him, Lucia said, already typing on her phone. As night fell, we prepared to leave at dawn to find Rodriguez. But as I checked the locks one last time, I noticed a small red light blinking in the corner of my living room. A camera. They were watching us. Lucia, I whispered, I think we need to leave right now. We slipped out the back door into the darkness, taking only what we could carry. As we reached Lucia's car, headlights appeared on the road, not coming from the main highway, but from the old logging trail that nobody used anymore. Someone had been waiting for us to make exactly this move. But who? Eduardo's men? Or someone else who had learned that Chief Torres was still alive? Get down, I whispered to Lucia, pulling her behind her car as the headlights swept across the yard. My old knees screamed in pain as I crouched, but fear is a powerful thing. It can make even a 95-year-old move like he's 20 years younger. The vehicle slowed at the end of the logging trail, its engine purring quietly. Not the roar of Eduardo's trucks. This was something smaller, more careful. Who is it? Lucia whispered, her phone clutched in her hand, ready to record. I don't know, I admitted. But whoever it is knows the back way to my farm. Not many people do. The car stopped about 50 yards away, its lights shutting off. In the pale moonlight, I could make out the shape of an old pickup truck. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Miguel, a voice called softly. A voice I hadn't heard in decades, but one I knew instantly. Miguel Torres? It's Rodriguez. My heart nearly stopped. Rodriguez, my old deputy, the man I was planning to find tomorrow. How did he know we needed him? Lucia asked, confused. I stood slowly, my joints protesting. Rodriguez, I called back. Is it really you? The man approached, and as he got closer, I could see the years had changed him. His hair was white now, his face lined with wrinkles, but he still walked tall, still had the watchful eyes of a cop. Chief, he said, reaching out to shake my hand. It's been a long time. How did you find me? I asked. How did you know I needed help? Rodriguez glanced around nervously. We need to move. Now, your farm is being watched, and not just by Vega's men. What do you mean? I demanded, but Rodriguez was already helping us into his truck. I'll explain once we're safe, he said, starting the engine. But right now, we need to disappear. As we drove away from my farm, perhaps for the last time, I looked back at the little house where Maria and I had spent our golden years. The place where I thought I'd die peacefully in my sleep someday. Now, it was just another thing the cartel was taking from me. Rodriguez drove us deep into the countryside, taking back roads I didn't even know existed. Finally, after nearly an hour, we pulled up to a small cabin hidden among pine trees. My fishing cabin, he explained as he ushered us inside. No one knows about it except my son, and he's in Alaska. The cabin was simple, one room with a wood stove, a table with chairs, and a couple of beds. Rodriguez lit a lantern, casting warm light across the space. Now, I said, sitting down heavily at the table, tell me how you knew to come for us. Rodriguez poured 3 cups of coffee from a thermos. I've been keeping tabs on you for years, Chief. Ever since you disappeared. I knew you weren't dead, no matter what the official story said. But why tonight? Lucia pressed. How did you know we were in danger? Rodriguez looked at me, his eyes serious. Because Vega's father is out of prison. Got released last week on a technicality. First thing he did was put out word he was looking for the cop who put him away 40 years ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. Carlos Vega is free? Rodriguez nodded. And his son Eduardo has been running the business while Daddy was locked up. Now, they're reunited and twice as dangerous. Lucia looked between us. So there are 2 Vegas after you now? It gets worse, Rodriguez said, pulling out his phone and showing us a news article. 3 days ago, the current police chief of Sonora was found dead. Shot execution style. The same day, 2 judges and a prosecutor from back in our day were also killed. My mouth went dry. They're eliminating everyone who helped put Carlos away. And anyone who might remember the real story, Rodriguez added meaningfully. What real story? Lucia asked, her reporter instincts kicking in. I exchanged a look with Rodriguez. There were things I'd never told anyone, not even Maria. Things about that final case that had made me flee Mexico with my family. Carlos Vega wasn't just another cartel boss, I said slowly. He had connections, high-level government connections. When we arrested him, we found a book, names, dates, amounts. Everyone he'd paid off, including the governor, Rodriguez added, and federal officials, even some American Border Patrol agents. Lucia's eyes widened. You had proof of corruption at the highest levels. I nodded. That's why they framed me for murder. To discredit anything I might say. To make sure that book never became public evidence. But you kept it, Rodriguez said. It wasn't a question. I stayed silent for a long moment. Then, yes, I kept it. Where? Lucia asked. I tapped my temple. Up here. I memorized the important parts before they took it from me. Names, dates, amounts. And I wrote it all down again once I was safe. You still have this evidence. Rodriguez looked shocked. After all these years, hidden, I confirmed, where no one would think to look. In the farm, Lucia asked, alarmed. We just left it behind. I smiled for the first time that night. No, Mija, not at the farm. Somewhere much safer. At that moment, a twig snapped outside. Rodriguez immediately doused the lantern, plunging us into darkness. We froze, barely breathing, as footsteps approached the cabin. Police, a voice called. Open up. Rodriguez pulled a gun from his waistband. That's not the police, he whispered. They wouldn't have found us this fast. I looked at Lucia, fear gripping my heart. Had I just led my granddaughter into a trap? And was the evidence I'd hidden for 40 years, evidence that could bring down not just the Vegas, but corrupt officials on both sides of the border, about to die with us? The windows shattered first. Glass sprayed across the cabin floor as bullets tore through the darkness. I grabbed Lucia and pulled her down behind the old wood stove, the only solid cover in the small space. Police, the voice called again, but the gunfire told a different story. Rodriguez fired back, 2 quick shots through the broken window. Back door, he hissed at us. There's a tunnel under the woodpile. Old smuggler's route. Go. I hesitated. I couldn't leave him to face them alone. Go. Rodriguez insisted. The book is more important than either of us, Chief. You know that. He was right. The evidence I'd hidden could bring down not just the Vegas, but an entire network of corruption that had festered for decades. I grabbed Lucia's hand, and we crawled to the back of the cabin. The door there was little more than planks nailed together, opening to a small clearing where firewood was stacked against the wall. Move the wood, I told Lucia as Rodriguez exchanged more gunfire with our attackers. Together, we pulled away split logs until we found the trapdoor beneath. It was heavier than I expected, and my old arms strained to lift it. I've got it, Abuelo, Lucia said, taking over. The trapdoor revealed a dark hole with a ladder leading down. The smell of damp earth rose from below. Ladies first, I said, helping Lucia onto the ladder. Just then, the front door of the cabin burst open. I heard Rodriguez shout, followed by 2 gunshots and a heavy thud. Rodriguez! I called out. No answer. The tunnel below was pitch black, but we had no choice. I followed Lucia down the ladder, pulling the trapdoor shut above us. Moments later, we heard footsteps overhead. Down here, someone shouted. They went down here. We had seconds, maybe less. I fumbled in my pocket for the small flashlight I always carried, a habit from my police days that had never left me. The beam revealed a narrow dirt tunnel stretching ahead. Run, I whispered to Lucia. We moved as fast as we could, which for me wasn't very fast at all. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding dangerously in my chest. Behind us, the trapdoor was flung open, and light poured into the tunnel. There they are, a voice shouted. A bullet whizzed past my ear, embedding itself in the dirt wall. I'm slowing you down, I gasped to Lucia. Go ahead. Not a chance, she replied, gripping my arm tighter. We do this together. Ahead, the tunnel forked. Without hesitation, I pulled Lucia to the right. This way. How do you know? She asked as we stumbled forward. Smugglers' tunnels always have a pattern, I explained between labored breaths. Right, then left, then right again leads to water. Sure enough, after 2 more turns, We emerged into a wider space where a small underground stream flowed. The water was only ankle deep, but the current was strong. Follow it downstream, I instructed. Water always leads to people. We waded into the cold stream, the water numbing my aching legs. Behind us, voices echoed in the tunnel, confused by the fork. They went left, someone shouted, guessing wrong. For now, we had a lead, but it wouldn't last long. These men were professionals. They'd figure out their mistake quickly. Abuelo, Lucia whispered as we moved through the water. Who was that? Not Eduardo's men. No, I replied grimly. Those were professionals. Hired guns, maybe even corrupt cops. But how did they find us so quickly? I had been wondering the same thing. Someone must have been tracking us. But who? The tunnel widened, and the ceiling grew higher. The stream deepened to our knees, then our waists. Swimming was out of the question for me. My old bones wouldn't handle the cold. There's got to be an exit soon, I said, more to myself than to Lucia. As if in answer, I spotted a metal ladder embedded in the wall ahead, leading up to what looked like another trapdoor. There, I pointed. We made our way to the ladder, and Lucia climbed up first to push at the trapdoor. It didn't budge. It stuck, she said, pushing harder. We're locked from the outside, I added, fear creeping into my voice. Behind us, splashing sounds indicated our pursuers had found the right path. They were gaining on us quickly. Try again, I urged. Put your back into it. Lucia braced herself and pushed with all her strength. The trapdoor moved slightly, then gave way, revealing starlight above. She pulled herself out, then reached down to help me. My arms felt like lead as I climbed the ladder. Every muscle screamed in protest, but the sound of men wading through water, getting closer by the second, gave me a burst of energy I didn't know I still had. Lucia's strong hands gripped mine, pulling me up and out of the hole. We found ourselves in a drainage ditch beside a rural highway. In the distance, headlights approached. Flag them down, I gasped, collapsing on the ground. Lucia ran to the roadside, waving her arms. The approaching vehicle, a semi-truck, slowed and stopped. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, rolled down her window. You folks need help? She asked, taking in our wet clothes and desperate faces. My grandfather is sick, Lucia said quickly. We need to get to a hospital. The driver hesitated only a moment before nodding. Hop in. As Lucia helped me into the truck, I glanced back at the drainage ditch. Dark figures were emerging from the trapdoor, scanning the area. We need to move fast, I whispered. The truck pulled away, leaving our pursuers behind for now. But they had found us once. They could find us again. Where to? The driver asked. I exchanged a look with Lucia. Where could we go? Who could we trust? Rodriguez was likely dead, and anyone connected to my past life might be compromised. Then I remembered. The book. My hidden evidence. If we could get to it, we might have leverage, something to bargain with, or at least expose the truth if the worst happened. Santa Fe, I said, naming a city about 3 hours away. We need to get to Santa Fe. The driver nodded and settled in for the drive. As highways rolled by, I finally had a moment to breathe, to think. Abuelo, Lucia said quietly, so the driver couldn't hear. You never told me where you hid this book. I smiled tiredly. I didn't hide a book, Mija. I hid the information. Where? In plain sight. In the one place no one would think to look. I tapped my chest. In Maria's grave. Lucia's eyes widened. Abuela's grave? How? When she died 15 years ago, I had something engraved on the inside of her casket. Names, dates, account numbers. Everything needed to expose the Vegas and their network. But why there? Lucia asked, horrified. Because no one would look there, I explained. And because I knew someday I might need to prove my innocence. To explain to you and your mother why I did what I did. Why I lied about who I was all these years. Lucia took my hand. I understand now. I squeezed her hand in return, but my relief was short-lived. A thought occurred to me that turned my blood to ice. The cemetery, I whispered. It's on the edge of my property. What are you saying? If Eduardo Vega gets my land, he gets Abuela's grave too, Lucia finished, understanding dawning on her face. And with it, he would get the evidence that could destroy him and his father. The evidence, that was my only leverage. Our only hope. We need to get there first, I said urgently, before they realize what I've done. But as the truck rumbled through the night, a new fear gripped me. What if someone already knew? What if that was why they wanted my land so badly? Not for smuggling routes, but for what was buried there. And if they knew about the evidence, they knew about Maria's grave, which meant we were already too late. The phone rang just as we were checking our old guns one last time. My heart jumped when I heard Commissioner Diaz's voice after all these years. "Torres, I got your message," he said, his voice low and quick. "I can't help you officially. The rot goes too deep, too high up." My hopes sank, but then he added, "But I'm turning in my badge tomorrow. Tonight, my security team won't ask any questions." Do you understand what I'm saying, old friend? I understood perfectly. Without saying it directly, Diaz was giving us one night to act with protection from the law. One chance to make things right. "Thank you," was all I could say. Rodriguez looked at me when I hung up. "So, we move tonight," I told the 4 men gathered in the small cabin. Lucia frowned at me from where she sat with her laptop. "Abuelo, you're 95 years old. Let me send all this evidence to the federal police instead." I shook my head. Evidence can disappear. Files get lost. People get paid off. We need to catch Eduardo with proof no one can ignore. The truth was harder to admit. I wanted to face the man who had burned my barn, threatened my granddaughter, and tried to steal my land. The man who knew my darkest secret. As darkness fell, 5 old men climbed into Rodriguez's truck. Our bones ached, but our eyes were sharp. We had spent decades pretending to be regular people, a farmer, a mechanic, a store owner, but underneath we were still the officers who had once fought the cartels together. "Remember," I told them as we drove toward Eduardo's huge house on the hill, "we're there for evidence only. No shooting unless absolutely necessary." The others nodded, but I saw the doubt in their eyes. They knew me too well. Eduardo's compound was surrounded by a tall fence with guards walking around it. But Rodriguez had found us a way in through an old drainage pipe that ran under the property. One by one, we squeezed through it, our old bodies protesting every inch. "I'm too old for this," wheezed Garcia as we emerged into a garden. "We were too old 20 years ago," Mendoza whispered back. Despite our age, we moved like shadows across the grounds. Our old training came back to us, muscle by muscle. I felt young again as we avoided security cameras and slipped past a guard sleeping in his chair. We had studied the building layout, thanks to Lucia finding property records online. Eduardo's office would be on the 2nd floor, East Wing. That's where we would find the proof we needed, records of bribes, threats, and illegal business. The house was mostly dark, with just a few lights on. We split into 2 groups. Ortiz and Garcia would watch the exits while Rodriguez, Mendoza, and I headed upstairs. The grand staircase creaked under our weight. At the top, we froze as a maid walked past with a stack of towels, but she didn't see us pressed against the wall in the shadows. "Third door on the right," I whispered, pointing down the hallway. The door was unlocked. Strange for a careful man like Eduardo. My police instincts screamed danger, but we had come too far to turn back. Rodriguez went in first, gun ready. Mendoza followed. I took a deep breath and stepped into the large office, expecting to find it empty. Instead, a desk lamp was on. Behind the expensive wooden desk sat not Eduardo, but Commissioner Diaz himself. He was counting stacks of money, his police uniform jacket hanging on a chair nearby. Our eyes met and time seemed to stop. For a moment, neither of us moved. "Chief Torres," he finally said, his voice tired. "I hoped you wouldn't actually come." Behind me, I heard Rodriguez's sharp intake of breath. Mendoza muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. "Diaz," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What are you doing here?" He looked down at the money, then back at me. "What does it look like, old man?" "I'm getting paid." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Diaz had been my best student, the young officer I had personally trained and trusted. I had recommended him for promotion when I retired. And now he sat before me, taking money from the very criminals we had sworn to fight. "You taught me everything, Torres," Diaz said quietly, reaching slowly for the drawer where most men would keep a gun. "Including that sometimes You must compromise to survive. I never taught you to sell your soul, I replied, raising my old service weapon. My hand didn't shake. Some things your body never forgets. Rodriguez and Mendoza both aimed their guns at Diaz too, but the tension in the room told me they felt the same confusion and hurt that I did. This man had been our brother in arms. Put the guns down, all of you, came a new voice from the doorway behind us. This reunion is touching, but unnecessary. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Eduardo Vega walked into the room, followed by two men with automatic weapons. We were surrounded. Eduardo laughed as he looked at us. Old men with old guns, caught in his trap. 2 generations of police, he said, walking to stand beside Diaz. Both in my pocket now. Your mistake, Torres, was thinking you were the only one who knew how to keep secrets. Diaz wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. His face was a mask of shame mixed with determination. Did you send him to me? I asked Diaz. Did you tell him who I really was? Before he could answer, a small movement caught my eye. Through the cracked open door to a side room, I glimpsed Lucia slipping in silently, her phone held up, recording everything. Her eyes met mine for just a second, and I understood our real plan was just beginning. I just needed to keep Eduardo talking. You look surprised, old man, Eduardo said, walking around the desk to stand in front of me. Did you really think your past would stay buried forever? Behind him, Diaz looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair. The money on the desk suddenly seemed to embarrass him. I'm curious, I said, keeping my gun steady, but making no move to use it. How long have you known who I was? My father told me stories about the great Chief Torres before he died in prison, Eduardo replied. The man who brought down half the cartel in the 1980s. When I saw your name on old land records, I got curious. So this isn't about the farm at all, Rodriguez said, understanding dawning on his face. The farm. Eduardo laughed. That worthless piece of dirt. No, this is about legacy. My father died because of Torres. Now I get to decide how Torres dies. From the corner of my eye, I could see Lucia still filming. Every word was being captured. Nobody needs to die tonight, Diaz said suddenly, standing up. We had a deal, Vega. The old man signs over his land and disappears quietly. No killing. Eduardo gave him a look of fake surprise. Plans change, Commissioner. Did you really think I let them walk out of here to tell everyone about our arrangement? Diaz's hand moved toward his gun, but Eduardo's men raised their weapons first. Don't, Eduardo warned. Remember who really runs this region now. Outside, we heard shouts and the sound of running feet. Eduardo frowned and walked to the window. What now? He muttered. That distraction was all I needed. I nodded at Rodriguez and Mendoza. In one smooth motion, we dropped to the floor as Diaz pulled his gun and fired at Eduardo's men. Gunshots filled the room. I crawled toward Lucia's hiding spot while bullets flew overhead. Did you do it? I asked her over the noise. She nodded, eyes wide but determined. Live streaming to my newspaper's website. The editor has already called the federal police. Eduardo was shouting orders into a radio, his face twisted with rage. One of his men lay on the floor, not moving. The other was exchanging shots with Diaz, who had taken cover behind the desk. We need to get out now, I told her. Stay low and head for the door. More gunshots came from downstairs. Ortiz and Garcia must be in trouble. The sound of sirens grew in the distance. We had almost reached the door when Eduardo spotted us. His eyes locked with mine, filled with hatred. Torres, he yelled, raising his gun. 3 shots rang out at once. One from Eduardo, one from me, and one from Diaz. Eduardo fell back against the window, a look of surprise on his face. He touched his chest where blood was spreading across his expensive shirt. Just like your father, I told him as he slid to the floor. Too confident to be careful. The sirens were very close now. Flashing lights filled the room from outside. Diaz stood up slowly, his own shoulder bleeding where a bullet had grazed him. Go, he told me, gesturing to a back staircase. I'll tell them you were never here. I looked at him, this man who had been both corrupt and, in the end, honorable enough to help us. No more running, I said. No more secrets. Federal agents swarmed into the room seconds later, shouting for everyone to get down. Lucia stepped forward, phone still recording. "I'm Lucia Torres from the National Journal," she said calmly. "I have evidence of everything that happened here tonight and the threats made against my grandfather." Dawn was breaking as we sat in the back of an ambulance. Blankets around our shoulders, cups of coffee in our shaking hands. Rodriguez, Mendoza, Ortiz, and Garcia were giving statements to serious-looking federal agents. Diaz sat in a police car, his future uncertain. My farm appeared on the horizon as we drove back, the morning sun lighting up my fields. The house was still standing, though the windows were shattered from the cartel's attack. My barn was still a pile of burnt wood, but was still mine. 3 days later, I sat on my porch again, watching as workers repair my roof. The land deed was back in my name, the threats gone. Eduardo Vega had survived his wounds, but would spend the rest of his life in prison, along with many of his men. Lucia joined me, sitting in the old chair that had been Maria's favorite. "The newspaper is calling you a hero," she said, showing me the front page with my picture. "Everyone's talking about Chief Torres and his last case." I sipped my coffee and looked out over the cornfields. Memories and regrets swirled in my mind, but for the first time in decades, there was no fear. "What will you do now that everyone knows who you really are?" Lucia asked. I felt both 95 and 35 years old at the same time. The young officer ready to fight for justice, and the old farmer who just wanted peace. "First, I'm going to plant next season's crop," I told her. "These fields won't farm themselves." She smiled, waiting for more. Then I continued. "I have some old case files I need to reopen. Your grandmother always said my biggest flaw was leaving things unfinished." In the distance, a truck approached, Rodriguez and the others returning with lumber to rebuild my barn. "I'm not the only one with unfinished business," I said. "There are other cartels, other corrupt officials. We may be old, but we remember how to fight." Lucia squeezed my hand. "Just promise me one thing, Abuelo." "What's that?" "No more secrets," she said. "From now on, we face things together." I looked at her determined face, so like her grandmother's, and nodded. Together, I agreed. No more secrets. As my old team pulled up to the house, I stood straighter than I had in years. The weight of my hidden past was finally gone. At 95, I had thought my life was nearly over. Now I realized it was simply taking a new turn.